Hi folks, my name is Arya and today we are going to learn the basics of document object model manipulation using JavaScript. So the document object model or DOM is a programming API for web pages. It defines the logical structure of the web document and the way a web page is accessed and manipulated, and JavaScript has become a near universal language for DOM manipulation. Now before we move ahead, let me give you guys a sneak peek into the topics that I intend to discuss with you guys today. So firstly, we're going to see what HTML is, because it is the language that makes the structure of the whole DOM. And then we're going to learn about something interesting called the HTML tree. Then we're going to briefly discuss CSS and selectors, and then finally move on to JavaScript and the functions that are used to select and modify queries. In the end, we're going to code a scorekeeper using HTML, CSS, and simple JavaScript, and it's going to look something like this. So we're going to have a basic web page that helps us keep track of a score of two teams. So suppose you were watching a football match with your friends and you want to keep track of the score. And suppose you also kept a limit that whichever team reaches 5 goals first is the winner. So you could say player 1 reaches 4 goals and then player 1 reaches 5 goals. So player 1's score becomes green and it shows that the winner is player 1. You can also set this to be any value that you want, and we'll work on this later on. So now let's begin with HTML. So HTML is a computer language devised to allow website creation. These websites can be viewed by anyone else connected to the internet. It is relatively easy to learn, with the basics being accessible to most people in one sitting, and it's also quite powerful in what it allows you to create. It is constantly undergoing revision and evolution to meet the demands and requirements of the growing internet audience under the directions of the World Wide Web Consortium, or W3C, which is the organization charged with designing and maintaining the language. Now the definition of HTML is hypertext markup language. Hypertext is the method by which you move around the web, that is by clicking on special text called hyperlinks, which bring you to the next page. Now the fact that it is hyper just means it is not linear. That is, you can go to any place on the internet whenever you want by clicking on links. There is no set order to do things in. Now markup is what HTML tags do to the text inside them. They mark it as a certain type of text, that is, suppose like italicized text, for example. And HTML is a language as it has a coded word and syntax like any other language out there. Okay, so now let's look at this interesting thing called an HTML tree. Now when your browser receives an HTML document, it renders it as a tree of all the elements, with the root element being the document object to which all the tags of HTML belong. We won't be going into tags and their uses, as you could very easily look up our HTML tutorial for that. Now the important thing to understand here is that the HTML tags are rendered in the order they are written, keeping their scope and indentation in mind. Anything indented under the scope of a tag becomes a child to that element's node in the tree, and the attributes of tags are also treated as children. Now, does HTML alone make up web pages? Well, of course not. We have CSS and JavaScript too. But what HTML does is build the basic structure of the view aspect of the web page. It's just the bare minimum. Using an analogy, one could say that if you were to put a web page under an X-ray machine, what you would see is the HTML, which is basically making it the skeleton of the web page. Okay, now that we know how HTML fits into the big picture, let's go and create the HTML for our very own Scorekeeper. Now I'm going to be using Sublime Text as my text editor, and you can use any text editor that you want to, actually. You can use stuff like Atom or Microsoft Visual Code. Now that's not important, so let's get on to the code aspect. Now we'll start off by creating the basic boilerplate for any HTML document. Now in Sublime, you can just go HTML and press tab, and that'll just create your HTML boilerplate. So we're going to call our Scorekeeper, let's call it Scorekeeper. Now the head has been created, so let's get into the body part. Now let's see. So first of all, this looks like an H1 that we have out here. So obviously we're going to need an H1 that says my Scorekeeper. So we go H1 and my Scorekeeper. Now we also see that it's bolded out here instead of text like this, which is just normal. So we obviously have to get it bold. So for that, we're going to use the strong tag, or you could also use the B tag, but strong tags is what I normally go with. Okay, so now that's done. So next it says score, and it's going to take the score of the first player and the second player. So we could, let's say, handle it in a certain way. So first, let's say it's an H3, and you're going to have the big tag. So it's going to say score. Let's give it a space out here. Now, these are two different paths. If you guys notice that this is one thing that gets updated separately, and this is another path that gets updated separately. So it's only natural that we should be giving them under separate tags. So let's create a span. So this will have a span, and let's say it has the ID of score1. I'll get into IDs just in a bit, and you'll understand what I'm doing out here. And let's say it'll close the span, and it says 2 out here, and the second span. So let's say 0, and it's gonna have an ID of score2. Now what we need next are 3 buttons. So we are gonna use the button tag for this thing. So let's create 3 buttons first. So this is a button that you're going to click to submit. So let me just clear it, reset this thing. And so, yeah, so that's a submit button. So this type is going to be submit. And it's going to be, let's call it, what's it called? It's called player 1. So player 1. Let's copy this thing out. Another button, it'll be of submit type 2. And we need another button. And this is going to say reset. Now our reset button is not exactly a submit, so let's leave that out. Then we also need a part which says the winner is, and if you guys see out here, if we keep the score to be 3, this part gets updated with the name of the player, that is player 1 for round. So we need another division in our document to actually create this. So let's go ahead and create the division. So first of all, we need an input part where we're inputting the limit of the score. So go input, and the type will be numbers, and so the name of limit, and let's give it a pre-made value of 5. Now once that's done, we have this, the winner is, so that can be just an h3, and let's say the winner is. So this part gets updated. So let's create a span out here. Let's keep the span empty as we're going to update it with our JavaScript. Let's have a look at what this looks like. So this is what a proper HTML would look like. Let's go and create a new folder. Let's call it demo. And we're going to call this index.html. Now, if you were to actually open index.html, we'll see that it looks nothing like this, whatever we've created already. Now, another thing, you see that these buttons are in one line. So actually, let's create a division for that. It's always nice to create divisions as it helps our code to be modular. Now that's done. Let's also keep the input in a separate div. And the h3 will just be there. Now let's keep this whole thing in a div. So, okay, let's get the indentation right. This comes here, this comes here, this comes here, and this is indented correctly, and that's all. Save our file, and let's see what this looks like. So let's find our demo folder. We have an index.html. Okay, so this is what our general skeleton of our Scorekeeper is going to look like. There's no styling attached to this, and there's absolutely nothing. It looks absolutely bland. Even the buttons don't work because there's no JavaScript to make them work. So as we see, we have created the skeleton of our Scorekeeper. So now to add some styling, we're going to need some CSS. Now before we use CSS, let's get into see what CSS actually is. Okay, now let's move on to CSS. So cascading style sheets, fondly referred to as CSS, is a simple design language intended to simplify the process of making web pages presentable. CSS handles the look and feel part of a web page. Using CSS, you can control the colors of the text, the styles of font, the spacing between paragraphs, and how columns are sized and laid out, what background images or colors are used, layout designs, variation in display for different devices, screen sizes, as well as a variety of other effects. CSS, just like HTML, is very easy to learn and understand, but it provides powerful control over the presentation of a web page. Now, the history of CSS dates back to the time of HTML 3.2, when tags like font and color was introduced, which made the lives of web developers utterly miserable, as they had to incorporate tedious styling changes to their documents. Now, to solve this problem, the World Wide Web Consortium made CSS. Now, CSS comes with quite a lot of advantages. CSS saves time as you can write CSS once and then reuse the same sheet in multiple HTML pages. You can define a style for each HTML element and apply it to as many web pages as you want. Secondly, pages load faster. If you're using CSS, you do not need to write HTML tag attributes every time. Just write one CSS rule of a tag and apply it to all the occurrences of that tag. So less code means faster download times. Also, it's really easy to maintain, and above that, larger array of styling choices than HTML attributes are available in CSS. Also, it has a multiple device compatibility. Okay, so CSS is basically used to style stuff. Now, how will the browser know where to render which style? Well, this is handled by selectors. Now, there are two major attributes that are used to select tags, that is classes and IDs. Classes are used to select a group of objects or tags, while IDs are used to select a particular element of a web page. While these are two basic selectors, there are a lot of selectors and you can have a look at them in the documentation of CSS selectors. Just remember that when you're selecting a class to style, we use the dot operator followed by the name of the class, and for IDs, we use the hash operator followed by the name of the ID. So going by the analogy I used to explain HTML as a skeleton of the web page, the skeleton where can be considered as the styling of the web page. Now just to give you guys an example as to how powerful CSS is, let's have a look at this web page called 𝐶SS_Zen_Garden. So I already have this website open, which is called 𝐶SS_Zen_Garden, and it shows us how much of a variety CSS can make. So this is just one website, and people are free to actually design the website however they want and submit it to the people who actually maintain this website. So we have multiple designs like this one. So it's the same website again and again, and we can see how different the design aspects can be. Now this looks completely different from what we were now looking at. It has a completely different layout and a feel to the website. So this is how powerful CSS can be. Now let's look at some other styles also, like look at the steel one. Now this has a completely industrial look to the website, and this is just what CSS can do. Okay, so enough of looking at other people's CSS. Let's get to coding some of our own CSS. Now for this, I'm going to be using Bootstrap 3, which is basically a CSS framework that again saves a lot of developers' time, as CSS can be a pretty tedious job. Nonetheless, Bootstrap lets us style stuff really quickly. Now to include Bootstrap into our web page, we're going to simply use the link tag and just use the CDN link for Bootstrap. Now Bootstrap uses class selectors to implement its styling changes onto elements, so we basically have to just remember that what each class does when using Bootstrap. It's a pretty simple and easy to use library, and I think I'll make a tutorial on it in the near future, seeing that Bootstrap 4 is gaining quite a lot of praise. But until then, just bear with me. For now, just understand that all we have to do to implement Bootstrap is simply add classes to the tags of our HTML document. Okay, so first of all, we need to go and find the CDN link for Bootstrap 3.3.7. So you go Bootstrap 3.3.7 CDN, and all you have to do is just copy this link and add it to your HTML page. So you add it under the head tag as you want it to load before the web page loads. So there you go. Now that we've included Bootstrap, we can go ahead and use it. Now to use Bootstrap, all we have to do is just add classes, as I just said. So the first one that we're going to add is for the buttons. Now remember, we had actually separated these buttons into separate divisions is just because so you could use the form group of Bootstrap. So you go class equals form group. So what form group does is actually groups all the buttons into a form, and it's just better for styling. Now the second one, what we have to do is add a class to the buttons so that they get stylized without us having to beat our brains out. So we go button, and another thing, we can use two classes at the same time. You just have to use a space between them. So the first class is going to be button, and the second class is going to be button default. So what button default does is actually styles the button into a white color that you can see out here. It'll give this gray color to the button. Second, we'll have to do the same thing to this button. So let's go ahead and do that. And we'll have to give this button a red color. So that's given by the class button danger. So button and button danger. Okay, so now that we've included a little bit of Bootstrap into our HTML web page, so this should include some CSS. Now let's save our file and let's see what it looks like. So just to remind you guys, this is what our web page looks like right now without any CSS. And as soon as we save it now, our web page is going to look a little bit different. Okay, so let's see what it looks like. Okay, now you guys can see that our buttons have become much better. It says player one in a much unique way, like the buttons are bigger, larger, and they have this nice shadow touch to it. We also have this reset button going for us, which is now red in color. And we also have our input groups, which have been changed now. Now, there's a lot more to do, so let's get on with that. Now we have to put a class into our input group also, which is of form control. So let's see what that does. So let's see form control. And our input has become much better. It has a shadow and it's just huge now. So we're going to control that with our own bit of CSS, but let's get down with Bootstrap for now. Now we also have to add the class form group into this div. Okay, so that was enough of using Bootstrap. It's time we write some of our own CSS. So for CSS, we're going to be using our selectors that we just learned about. So first of all, we need some general styling for our entire web page. So let's give this div an ID out here, and let's call it a class actually. So let's call it content. Now, all we have to do is select content in our CSS. So we go dot content because it's a class, and we start styling it. So first of all, we need to align all this text in the center. So we go text, align, and we go center. Secondly, we need some margins also. So we go margin right, and let's say we want a 30% margin from the right, and margin left could be, let's say 35%. Now margin top is gonna be, let's keep it also 25% from the top. Okay, so first we need to save this as our CSS file, so we're gonna call it style. Then we also need to include this into our file. So we go with the link tag. Now we just go style.css because it's in the same folder that we had saved it. And let's see how that changes our web page. Okay, we have everything in the center now. Our text is aligned properly. We have margins and everything's where we want it to be. Now we also need a background image because out here you're seeing a very good background image which shows some football. So I've already downloaded the background image, and let me just transfer it to the folder. Yeah, so let's go to our CSS again, and we need the body tag. So to just select tags like that, we just go body and open brackets, background image. So we're going to give it a URL, which is just the name of the picture. So I've saved it as the background is BG and it's a JPEG file format. Next, we have to set the background size. Let me just show you guys what it looks like with the background image. So as we see that the background image isn't really centered properly. So let's fix that now. So we go background size and we say cover. So cover will cover the entire web page. Let's see how that looks. Yeah, that's nice. Then for the content, as you guys see out here, the color here is grayed out, but the color here is white. So we say color and white, and that has changed our color to white. Nice. Secondly, we're going to set the opacity of our background image to be 60%, so it gives it that nice transparent feeling. Also, we need to set our HTML to be 100% of the screen. So you go height and say 100%. Let's see how that changes everything. Yep. Now, as you guys can see, it's not really identical to everything out here. There's no spacing between this, so we'll get to that in just a bit. But for now, we've almost replicated what we wanted to create. But still, there's no life to this application. If you press player 1, nothing happens. You press reset, nothing happens. It's just a bunch of buttons that do nothing. So for that, we're going to need JavaScript. So JavaScript is a scripting language that enables you to create dynamically updating content, control multimedia, animate images, and pretty much everything else. Okay, not everything, but it is amazing what you can achieve with a few lines of JavaScript code. Above that, the fact that it is lightweight and universally used just puts icing on the cake, really. So to learn more about JavaScript, you can check out our recently launched JavaScript tutorial, which teaches the basic of the language. Something new that we are going to learn today is how to use JavaScript to select elements of an HTML document and manipulate them accordingly. So for this, we have some functions called selector functions. We select the element using the function and store the element in a named variable and manipulate it as we want using semantics of programming. So let's go through the most used functions and their uses. So first of all, if you guys see, all these functions are of the document object. So this means they are from the document object, which is basically used for DOM manipulation stuff. So the first function that we have is the document.querySelector. So it'll take in an argument of the query name, and it returns the first element within the document that matches the specified selector. Secondly, we have document.querySelectorAll. Now this returns a static node list representing a list of the document's elements that match a specified group of selectors. So basically, if you're finding all the p tags in a document, you can use a document.querySelectorAll. Next, we have document.getElementById. So this returns an element object representing the element whose ID property matches the specified string. Also, we have the document.getElementsByClassName, which returns a collection of elements in the document with the specified class name as a node list object. Now, referring back to the analogy, for explaining CSS and HTML, JavaScript fits into the picture as the dynamic actions that the skeleton in question performs, like dancing as you see here. Okay, now it's time to bring our own Scorekeeper to life by actually adding in some JavaScript. So let's get started. Now, first of all, we are going to create a new file and we're going to make it a JavaScript file. So now once that's done, let's get ahead and create our own JavaScript. Okay, now once we've set our file to be a JavaScript type, let's go and analyze what we're going to try and make. So if you see out here, wait, let me reset it once. So yeah, if you see out here, every time we click player 1, this part, the score part, gets updated. So first of all, we have to tie in these two parts. So this is going to be a counter, and this is going to be the part that is updated. So let's see how we do that. First of all, we have to select our counter, which is the button. So our button needs to have an ID. Okay, so let's see out here. So our first button needs to get an ID, and let's call it counter1. And let's give by ID of player 2 button counter2. Fine, let's save it, and let's move ahead. So let's say variable button1 is equals document, I'm terrible at typing, document.querySelector. Now what we want to select is the ID 1. Now you could have also used document.getElementById, but I'm just going to try and showcase all the functions that we learned. So double quote this. So this will select this button, the button 1 that we have created out here. This says player 1. So now we also need to select the score part, which is this part, this highlighted part that you see out here, which is the span in the HTML, which is score1. So to select that, we have to create a variable. So let's say a variable that says player 1 score, and we use document.querySelector, and we're trying to select score1 because that's the name of the ID of the span. Yep, score1. And we're going to say that variable score of player 1 is 0. Now we need to do the same for player 2 and its button. So let's copy this down now. So this is called button 2. It's going to select counter 2. This is called player 2 score, and it's going to select score 2. And score 2 will also be 0. Now let's also select the reset button for our use later on. So variable reset is document.querySelector, and let's say hashtag reset, because was that the name of the ID? Okay, let's give it the ID reset because we haven't given it any ID. So we've given reset button an ID and we've selected it through that. Let's save both the files. So we're going to call the script. So now that's created, let's go ahead and create some event listeners. So what exactly is an event listener? Well, you're going to be clicking on these buttons, right, on the web page. So every click is actually an event that you are triggering. So we need an event listener for that. So how do we create an event listener? Well, all we have to do is say button1.add event listener. And in this, we are going to pass in the event that we are looking for, which is a click, and the callback function, which is basically the function that is executed on the event when it's triggered. So first of all, we need to select the limit. So let's go and create the limit tags out here. Let's give this input an ID of limit, and let's select it. So we go variable limit equals document.querySelector, which is basically the limit ID that we just now created. Now what we need from this is the value. So we can do that by going dot value, and we'll get the value of the limits that is set out here. So if our value is being set to 5, the dot value will give the limit value of 5. Now every time it's pressed, what we want to do is increment our score1 out here by 1. So we can do that by saying score1 equals plus plus. So score equals score plus 1, which is basically shorthand written as score1 plus plus. And we also need to change the text content out here. So what we can do is go, okay, document and player1 score dot text content equals to the score1. Now that we've added an event listener to that, we also have to add an event listener to our second button. Let's copy this down. So button2.add event listener. This is also going to have a limit which is equal to the value. Then we're going to addition to the score 2 out here, and player 2 score will be changed. Now what we are forgetting is we also have to check if the score of player 1 is greater than player 2 and if he has already won or not. So if we don't put a condition to check if he's won, we just keep on incrementing the score and this condition will never be met. So we need to handle that now. For that, we need an if statement. So we go if. So first of all, if the score is equals to the limit. So score1 equals to the limit, or if score1 is greater than score2 and what? So score1 has to be greater than score2 and score1 also has to be more than the limit. So score1 more than the limit. Now if this condition is met, that means somebody's won. So what we see out here that whenever somebody wins, their digit turns green. Now to do that, we can add a neat little trick. First of all, let's go into our styles. Let's create a class called green. Go dot green, and we just have to make the color green, right? Now we can add this class whenever somebody is won. So we're just gonna add this green class to the elements of whoever's winning. So we do that by saying p1 score dot class list dot add, and you say the name of the class. So you go green. Then what you see out here when somebody's won, these two buttons get disabled. So we can do that too by saying button1 dot set attribute, and you go disabled and true. We'll also need to do this for button 2. Yep. And we also need to print winner. So let's handle that later. Let's do this if statement for this function too, for button 2. So copy that down, go down to the function for button 2 and set it there. So if score 2 and just flip everything down. Okay, so now we've worked on these two buttons. Now we also need to work on the reset button. So when the reset button is clicked, everything goes back to the way it was. The value goes back to 5, there's no winner printed, these buttons get undisabled, and the score goes back to 0 and 0. So that's a lot to do. So let's add an event listener to our reset button. So we've already selected our reset button into this variable called reset. So we're going to just use that. So reset dot add event listener, and we're going to be listening for a click here too, and we're going to pass in a callback function. Now first of all, we want to undisable the two buttons. So button1 dot add attribute, or rather we're removing an attribute. So we want to remove the attribute disabled, and we want to do this for button 2 also. So we now also need to make the text green. So we can just go p1 score dot remove class list. So you have to remove the class list. So class list dot remove, and you want to remove green. And since you don't know if player 1 or player 2 is winning, you want to do it for both of them. We also have to set both the scores to 0. So we go score1 equals 0. Or you can just go score1 and score2 equals 0. What we need to do next is actually display the scores to be 0 and 0 again. To do that, if you guys remember, we go p1s dot text content equals score1. And the same goes for p2 score also. Next, we need to define the limit and set it to the default of 5 again. So for that, we need to say document dot query selector, and we want to select limit, which is an ID, and we want to make its value equals 5. Okay, and if you guys remember, we also need to print out the winner. So let's go and do that. So first we need to give an ID to the span that we had created. So let's call this winner. Now we need to select the span. So to select the span, all you have to do is create a variable called winner. And you go document dot query selector, and you pass in the ID that is winner. So this will select our ID. So first of all, when somebody wins, we need to actually update the winner content. So if somebody wins, all we have to do is say winner.text content equals to player 1 or something like that. So actually we're going to create a new function just for that. So let's do that first. Function print winner. We're going to pass in the name, and let's say if score 1 is greater than score 2, we want to print so winner.text content equals to player 1, and else it's just going to be winner.text content equals player 2. Let's give this space. Actually, player 2 is the right way. We actually don't need to pass in anything, to be honest. Let's go up here. Now, when this is done, when all this is done, we want to call print winner and pass in the scores actually. But the scores are actually global variables so that they can be accessed from all these functions, so we don't need to do anything. So you go print winner here, and after you've done all that, we go print winner. And in the reset function, all we have to do is set the winner content. So winner dot text content equals nothing. So that's how it is. So now all we need to do is add our script to our HTML page, and we do that using the script tag. So we say the type is either text or JavaScript, and we give the source, which is basically the name of the script. So script.js. Let's save that. Let's save all our files. Okay, now let's see if our Scorekeeper is actually running properly. Okay, something's wrong. Document is not defined. JS6. Okay, document JS6. Okay. Cool. That should fix it. Okay, now let's see if it works. So player 1 should get updated. If that's not working, it looks like we've done something wrong. So to always see what is wrong, you go into the console and you always edit out. So we see we cannot read property of value of null, HTML button element anonymous, JS14. 14 document.create query limit. So apparently it can't select limit. So okay, yeah, we forgot to put the hash. It's an ID. Have we done this mistake anywhere else? I don't think so. Okay, let's go ahead and try again. Okay, our scores are updating, and let's see if it turns green as it turns 5. Yep. And let's see if the reset button works now. The reset button is working, but our score is not actually being updated again. So we have to set that again. Let's see. What did I do wrong? Okay, so let's declare them separately, and let's see if that works. Click it up to 5. The winner is player 1. Click reset, it goes back to 0. Okay guys, so we've successfully created our very first Scorekeeper. You can use this nifty app to actually keep the scores between teams if that's what you want to do. But this actually what it showed us is how we can manipulate the document object model using JavaScript so efficiently. Okay guys, so that was it for me from today. I hope you guys had fun learning about JavaScript and document object manipulation. Until next time, goodbye.